So I've been getting some questions lately about how to do CRUD operations on multiple tables in TypeORM. So in this video with the following table setup, we're going to do some examples of how we can create stuff, update stuff, delete stuff, and most importantly, query different stuff in this relationship. So this is the table setup that I have. Now this is just an example, and I'd love to do more examples like this. So if you have any suggestions on setups you'd like to see, let me know in the comments below. But here what I have is three tables. I have a user, a note, and a shared note. So the idea is users can create notes. So this is a many-to-one relationship. So one user can have many notes, but each note is only has only one owner, is what I'm calling it, so it belongs to one user. And then I want to be able to share these notes to other users, so that's what this table does right here. So the shared note table. So this has a sender ID, so the person who wants to share the note, a target ID, who they're sharing it with, and both of these you'll notice point to the user, so these are two foreign keys to the user. And then a note ID, so which note is actually being shared between these two users. We are connecting back to the note. All right, so we're going to start by how to set this relationship up in TypeORM, and then go over some stuff on CRUD operations. All right, so first up, we're going to look at the user table, or the user entity. So this is what I have set up here. You'll notice a few things. So we have just our ID, our user column, those are basic. And then we have this thing called notes, and notes shared with you, and this stuff down here. So this I'm going to get to in just a second. So imagine that's not there right now. This is our basic user table. All right, and this will make more sense why we add that when we head over to notes. All right, so now we have our notes table. Again, we have these two columns. Now the interesting part is when we start doing relationships in TypeORM, that's where all this other junk comes in. So in this case, I want it to relate note to user, and I want to set up a relationship where a note can belong to a single user, and a user can basically have multiple notes. So the way we do that is we want to store the owner ID, which is a foreign key to the user, on the note. And basically to set up the relationship, we say many-to-one, and that's type relationship. And here you basically give the name, so in this case, owner. So this is a special column in TypeORM, or it's not really a column, but this is the name of the relationship in TypeORM, and you're going to use this later on if you want to query stuff. Anyway, and I like to explicitly say what the join column is. So these two fields you can kind of think of are connected. So here the owner ID, I have it called owner ID here. So if you rename the name of the join column here, you can put that here. So those should be matching. All right. So anyway, the part that's in here is basically the reverse of the relationship. So here you're saying the user is the reverse of the relationship. So that's what you're connecting to, the user type or the user entity. And then you say on that user, how does the user get your entity? In this case, notes, which is an array of notes. So you basically set up this way. It's kind of wonky, but that is the gist of it. So then on the other side, the user, you set this up the opposite, so one to many. And here you say the entity that's getting connected with it, a note. In this case, you say the field that's connecting it, so note.owner. So you notice I have notes here and notes here, and then I have owner here and owner here. So basically they cross-reference each other, and then you get an array of notes. And basically you do the same thing with a shared note. So these two are together. So we set up a relationship between the user and the shared note table. And in this case, that's the target ID. And again, we say, here's our user type, and I'm saying, and I made a kind of an explicit name here, to make it obvious, but here we're saying notes shared with you. So these are all the notes people shared with you. That's the reference of it. So we set up the opposite relationship here. And again, target is the name of it here, so you do it. And basically the exact same thing for sender, and I called it notes you shared, and that's basically the reference key. And then lastly, this is the setup for the notes. So again, we have the node ID and then the node itself, and then this is a many-to-one with a note. And then I called it shares because this is all the shares that the note has basically belonged in. This could probably be a better name. But anyway, that is how you set up the relationship. Let's get more into how we query this and whatnot. So we're going to start off with the very basics. This is just doing CRUD operations on a single table. So first off is just how to create something. So this is going to be using extending base entity. So I have extend base entity on all my entities. So that allows you to do the active record style, which is what this is called. But if you want to use data mapper, you can. It's going to be pretty much, it's going to be very similar approach, but different syntax. All right, so user.create, and then we're just saving it. So this is our creating user in the database. This is us updating. So this is, I want to find a user with this ID, and then we're saying these are the values that are going to be updated. This is us finding a single user, which has the username of Tom. This is us finding multiple users that have a username of Tom. So this is an array of users. This is a single user. And lastly, this is us deleting all users that have the username of Tom. So this is the foundation, and you're going to need to use these commands on all your entities. All right, so next up is how we do stuff in the many-to-one relationship. So how do we create a note? So in this case, I've created a user called Joe, and I want to create a note for Joe, or Joe wants to create a note. How do I do that? Well, we say note.create, and you'll notice I'm using the joe.id as the owner ID field, and I'm saving that. So that's how you set that up. And then how you would query all the notes that Joe has created. One way is to say note.find, and you're searching for all the owner IDs that meet the ID that Joe is. All right, so that is that. Let's move on to the many-to-many level. So with this, for example, let's say Joe wants to share a note with another user, and I called this other user Tim. So in this case, we can say the sender ID, we can say shared note.create, and we can say joe.id. So that is the person who's sending the note to Tim, who's the target, and then the note that we're doing is the note that Joe created up here. All right, cool. And then here we have notes shared with Tim. So this is a query. Here's how we can query all the notes that people have shared with Tim. So we could say shared note.find, and then we're saying where the target ID is equal to tim.id. And now by default, this will only give us a shared note entity, and we don't really care about this. This is not really valuable. It only has these three fields on it, which don't give us any information. We actually want the actual note itself with the text. So to be able to get that, we have to say relations and then the name. So in this case, relations and then note. And the name that I have here matches the name that I use here. All right, so that's that. And this is where things get complex or harder, in my opinion. So we have this, all these names that we set up here, and we can use those to query more than one thing. So for example, in our user over here, we set up these guys, right? And so we can use those relationships. So I can do the same thing that I did right here, down here. So here is me fetching a user. I'm finding a single user, and when I load that user, I'd also like it to load these two relationships. So in this case, notes shared with you. So basically this is finding all the notes that Tim has, or not all the notes, but all the notes that people shared with him. So you notice I said notes shared with you. Again, the name is matching this here. And then lastly, I have .note. So you'll notice I'm loading two relationships. That's because I want to load the note on here as well. So it's loading not only the shared note, but also the note itself. That's what those two do. So cool. So that's that. And this is, in my opinion, where it gets complex, is when we start doing stuff like this. Here's another example. So with Joe, I can find the other side. So I can see, as Joe, which notes did you share with people, right? So I want to say, I would use the other side, notes you share, and then load the note itself. So cool. You can also kind of like mash these two together. So for example here, I want to find all the notes Joe has shared and all the notes that have been shared with Joe. And so that's what this bit here is. You'll notice I put some console logs above and below this. That's because I was wanting to see the SQL output of this. And whenever you're doing TypeORM stuff, or really any ORM stuff in general, I highly recommend logging what the output is, or the SQL generated. So I have logging set to true in my ORM config. And so when I run this, I can see what gets executed, the SQL for it. In this case, it's quite ugly. So if we take a look, here is the start and here's the end. And so you notice it generated 2 SQL queries actually, 1, 2, and they're quite big just to find that thing. And really, this is unnecessary. So this would require some SQL knowledge to know how to rewrite this yourself. But this is a case where you could actually write it yourself by hand. And in my opinion, actually writing this stuff by hand is actually a little bit easier than trying to set up all these names of things. It can get a little confusing in my opinion. So you can actually use the query builder to make things a little bit simpler. If you don't even want to write raw SQL, you don't have to. And this is where I find probably doing most of my stuff in TypeORM is actually probably with the query builder. Because this gives me some nice flexibility of I get to write the SQL that I want, but also it's very easy to do conditionals and pass in variables and whatnot into my SQL. So all right, let's break this down. So basically, this query is basically this query, but a little slightly different. So here I want to get all the notes that Joe owns and that were shared with him, and I want to do it in one SQL statement. And so this is the SQL statement that gets generated at the bottom, and that does that. Now it's slightly different because I'm not fetching the actual user as along with all the notes. I'm just fetching the notes. But you'll notice I have to put in a little bit more work myself, right? You could probably say this is a little bit simpler. But you get to control exactly how the SQL is getting run, and so this can be very important, especially when you get into more complex queries. So let's break this down a little bit. So here I'm saying the connection. So in this case, I'm just wrapping this entire thing in a create connection. I'm grabbing the connection, the TypeORM connection. So that's that. You can also use get connection if you don't have direct access to a connection object. All right, so we're saying dot get repository on what we want to fetch. So in this case, I'm wanting to fetch notes. And then you say dot query builder, and then here you give the alias. So the alias is what I'm going to use to reference throughout this SQL query. So in this case, I'm going to call it n. And we're doing a left join here because the shared note, we want to be able to see the notes that are not shared and shared. So we want to see both. So we're doing a left join here as opposed to an inner join. And then we have, here's another alias. So I called this shared note SN. So here I'm joining on these 2 fields. So where the node ID matches the shared note node ID. And then we just have 2 where conditions. So the first where condition is where either where the note owner ID is equal to Joe's ID. So in this case, we're doing colon and then a name. And this basically does a variable injection, or basically just puts this Joe ID here. And also we're saying or whether Joe's the target of someone sharing the note. And then we put in that substitution there too. And then we're saying get many. So this will return an array of notes that match these conditions. All right, so those are a couple CRUD operations here. I don't know if this is helpful. Let me know in the comments below if you like this or if you'd like to see more like this. And if you do, let me know, I don't know, I guess like database setups that you think, or table setups that you're trying to do, or you think that would be helpful, or if there's particular queries that you're struggling with writing. Let me know.